Superman, Brain Drain, Metropolis, Rhode Island, March 2007. It was a normal spring day, gray and rainy, as the people were bustling through the streets on their way to work. On a busy downtown intersection was one lone policeman directing traffic in that heavy rain, as the power had gone out in the area and the traffic lights were not working. The police officer was doing his job diligently when all of a sudden a beam of pink energy hits him right in the head. It was over, but the policeman was feeling weird, like he couldn't think straight. Suddenly, he drops both of his arms and walks aimlessly through heavy traffic. Well, the cars were blowing their horns at him as he was walking like a zombie down the street. A giant semi was about to hit him. Luckily for the police officer, Clark Kent was nearby walking to his job. When he saw what was about to go on, Clark quickly ran at super speed, leaving a trail of blue and red streaks. He had changed to Superman in the process and quickly grabbed the officer and got him out of the way before the truck could run him down. Superman places the police officer back on his feet, and he asks the police officer if he was okay, but Superman got a strange response from the policeman. Well, Superman, cool, you real. Superman was puzzled by the policeman's reaction, so was the crowd that was gathered around. Then Superman asked the policeman if he was okay, and the policeman says, I don't know. What is okay? Superman then decides to fly the policeman to the nearest hospital, which he did. Afterwards, Superman flies to the Daily Planet, goes into the closet, and then Clark Kent emerges from the closet. Clark quickly punches in and sits at his desk. There, Lois had just come in and sat at her desk, and Jimmy was coming to say hello to everybody. And Clark quickly begins typing up the story of Superman saving the policeman. He sends it to the chief, and then Lois asks him, so Clark, what was that you just typed up? And then Clark says to Lois, oh, I just saw Superman save a policeman's life. He almost got ran down. He was walking in the middle of the road for no apparent reason. And Lois says, that's bizarre. And then she goes on to tell Clark, oh, I'm going later on to cover the mayor's press conference on some new proposed tax in the city, she says. Then Perry White sticks his head out of the office and screams, Kent, get in here now! So Clark gets up and heads over to Mr. White's office. As he enters Mr. White's office, he shuts the door behind him, and Perry White says to Clark, Kent, I'm assigning you to the Lex Luthor story. The man is still at large. And Clark says, okay, sir, but I have a feeling that Luthor has fled town. And Perry White says, well, that's for you to decide. I have a feeling he's still in town, and he's going to strike. Later on that morning at Metropolis University, at the office of physics professor Dr. Harris, he was getting his paperwork ready for his lecture when he heard the door to his office open. He turns around thinking it was one of his students, but then his face lights up with shock and he says, wait a minute, you're not one of my students. Then a pink energy beam hits him in the head. Moments later, at the classroom, Dr. Harris's physics students were coming in and taking their seats, ready to start another morning of note-taking and listening to the doctor's lectures. But the students noticed that the man at the podium was not the professor, it was another man, and suddenly a pink energy beam hits a lot of the students in the head. Later at the university, Professor Harris and a lot of his students were being wheeled away on gurneys to the ambulance, and the police along with Inspector Henderson were there too. And Clark walks up to Inspector Henderson and says, hey Bill, what's going on? And then Inspector Henderson says to Clark, well Clark, it seems like Lex Luthor has struck again. And I don't know what that madman has concocted. He has some sort of device that he zaps people in the head with, and it leaves them stupefied. And Clark's like, what? How did he do that? And then Inspector Henderson says, well, Clark, unfortunately, I'm not a scientist, so I can't explain to you how the process works. All I know is that the witnesses have described him wearing some sort of fancy headband with a laser on it, or some sort of ray gun that shoots out a pink energy beam to the target's head and sucks their IQ dry. And then Inspector Henderson went on to explain to Clark further, it seems that the professor's got it the worst. He is completely unconscious and no one could rouse him. We can't wake him up. Then Clark asks Inspector Henderson, what time did the attack take place? And Inspector Henderson says, maybe 10-15 minutes ago. We got the entire campus cordoned off, and the campus police is helping us in the search for Luthor. Then Clark asks Inspector Henderson one more question. Bill, what is a symptom of someone who's been zapped by Luthor's brain drain machine? And then Inspector Henderson says to Clark, that's a cute name, the brain drain machine. Well, the victims seem like they're zombie-like, some of them. They just wander around aimlessly. And when you try to ask them something, it seems like they're completely incapable of any higher form of thought, while others act like they're stoned. And then Clark realized that the policeman that he saved earlier may have been a victim of Luthor's brain drain machine. And he says, Inspector Henderson, Superman saved a police officer earlier who exhibited all those symptoms. He was at the Metropolis General Hospital. And Inspector Henderson says, thanks, Clark. Later, somewhere in Metropolis, in Lex Luthor's hideout, Lex Luthor was busy inputting mathematical data into a computer. After he was finished, he presses the enter button and sees the computer compiling and crunching all the data. Lex Luthor's face lights up with glee and he says aloud to himself, thanks to my brain drain machine, I'm able to increase my brain power enough to help me with a lot of mathematical formula that was taking way too long to solve. Now I'm several months ahead. Then Lex looks at his wristwatch and he says aloud, oh no, the press conference is going to start soon. I have to go and teach the mayor a lesson. Later that afternoon, everybody was coming into the Metropolis City Hall for the mayor's press conference. As everyone was coming in from the wet day outside, unbeknownst to the people coming in, a frog had slipped through the front door and began hopping his way around the lobby. Everybody from the press were being guided to the press room on the right of the lobby. Well, among them was Lois and Jimmy. They take their seats, and Jimmy starts taking photos of the podium. And Lois says to Jimmy, let's see what this idiot's reason for hiking our taxes are for. And Jimmy says to Lois, it's probably some lame excuse like the last time, he says to Lois. And then Lois says to Jimmy, I don't know why this man keeps winning the elections. The people who vote for him are stupider than he is. A guy sitting next to Lois overheard her comments and begins to defend the mayor, saying to Lois, well, excuse me, madam, this mayor has done a lot for the city in the last 10 years. And Lois says to the man, really? Name one good thing he's done for the city. And the man has a long pause. He couldn't think of one thing. And Lois says, my point exactly. You can't think of one good thing that this mayor has done. And the man decides to insult Lois, saying to her, wait a minute, I know you. You're that Lois Lane lady that works for the Daily Planet. I've read your articles. They suck. And then Lois says to the man, really? This is what you resort to? You can't think one good thing that this mayor has done, and you resort to this childish kindergarten garbage of name-calling? You prove my point, sir, that all the people who vote for this mayor are dumber than a sack of doornails. The man stayed quiet. Suddenly, a man walks up to the podium and introduces the mayor of the city. As soon as the mayor walks out to the podium, there was very few applause in the room, and the mayor let out a slight awkward smile. Then he gets on to his speech about why he wants to raise the taxes in the city. As he was doing that, suddenly, a beam from the brain drain machine hits him. Soon the mayor falls to the ground unconscious, and Lex Luthor runs up to the stage. The mayor's bodyguards run after Luthor, and Lex quickly uses his brain drain machine and absorbs all the intelligence from the guards, knocking them out cold. Then Lex walks up to the podium and he says on the microphone, "Ladies and gentlemen, I just sucked the mayor's brain dry, and guys, it's true. He's an idiot. There wasn't much in there that I could use." And then Luthor says to the scared audience, "I'll guess I have to use all of your brain power. I need to find a way to get rid of Superman, and it takes a lot of thinking to do it." Then Lex Luthor begins to use his brain drain, attacking random audience members, draining their brains. Lois and Jimmy quickly duck to the ground behind the chairs, and Lois says to Jimmy, "Jimmy, use your phone and call the police. I'll use my phone and call Clark." Well, both of them did that. Meanwhile, at the Daily Planet office, Clark was typing away at a story when suddenly his desk phone rings. Clark picks up the receiver and speaks into it, saying, "Daily Planet, Clark Kent speaking." And then Lois frantically says over the phone, Clark, it's me. Listen, you gotta find Superman. It's Lex Luthor. He is here at the press conference, and he's attacked the mayor, and he's attacked a lot of people with that brain drain machine of his. I'm hiding along with Jimmy, but I don't know how long we can stay hidden until he finds us." And then Clark says to Lois, "Stay there. I will find Superman." And then he hangs up, and then he gets up, and he runs right out of the bullpen and into the hallway. Then Clark runs to the stairwell and runs up the stairs. He finally makes it to the roof of the Daily Planet. There, Clark runs to the edge and dives off. As he was falling, he puts his hands together, and soon his business suit turns into his Superman suit and he flies off. Soon, Superman lands in front of City Hall. He could hear the distant sirens getting closer as the police were coming. Superman makes his way into the lobby, and the lobby was dead quiet. So Superman makes a turn to the right and heads into the press room. There in the press room, he saw several people unconscious, and he saw everybody else wandering around like zombies. And then Superman asks all the people, "Have you seen Lex Luthor?" And everybody just gave Superman a blank look like they didn't know he was talking about. And Superman says to himself aloud, "He's probably run off." And then suddenly Superman hears a familiar voice saying to him, well, Blue Boy, I'm glad you made it." Superman turns around and sees Luthor with the brain drain machine on his head. The brain drain machine was rather simplistic looking. It was a high-tech looking headband with a mini satellite dish on the forehead. And Luthor says to Superman, "I was collecting IQ power so I could figure out a way to destroy you. But now I'm thinking to myself, maybe if I drain your mind, maybe I'll have all the knowledge that I need. Knowledge to do many things," he says to Superman. And then Superman says to Lex, "You'll never get away with this, Luthor. I'll see to it." And Lex interrupts Superman saying, "Oh, shut up, you do-gooder." And then he begins to shoot at Superman with his brain drain machine. But Superman quickly leapt out the way, and Luthor missed. Then as Superman gets back up, Luthor takes another shot at him, and Superman moves out the way. Finally, Superman stands back up, and then he faces Luthor face to face, and then Lex takes a shot at Superman with his brain drain machine, but Superman lets out blue beams from his eyes, and it hits the brain drain beam head on, and the blue energy beams that were coming out of Superman's eyes were pushing back against the pink brain drain beam. Soon, Lex Luthor, holding the remote control to control the brain drain machine, began to slowly turn the giant dial in the center of the remote up, increasing the power output of the brain drain machine. Well, eventually, the power output overpowered Superman's eye beams, and Superman got hit by the brain drain beam. Superman quickly fell back, but he was not alright. He felt completely stupefied. Superman quickly hid from Lex, The brain drain beam took a little bit out of Superman's mind, but not enough to really affect him like it has done the others. But it's disoriented him, and he really couldn't figure out how to use his powers. As Superman lay hiding behind a pillar in the press room, he was trying to think how to get Lex. Suddenly, Superman sees the little frog that had entered the city hall when everybody else was entering. Then Superman was struck with an idea. He grabs the frog, and then he comes out of hiding, and he says, "Okay, Lex, you win. I give up." And then Lex says to Superman, "I'm glad you see it my way, Blue Boy." And then he begins to shoot Superman with the brain drain machine. But before the beam can hit him, Superman quickly pulls out the frog that he had hiding behind him and puts it in the way of the beam. Soon the brain drain beam hits the frog and drains all the frog's intelligence into Lex's head. The little frog lost consciousness, and now Lex Luthor had the intelligence of the frog, and he began hopping around like a frog, and he was saying aloud, "What's going on? Oh no, Ribbit!" He had fully absorbed all the frog's intelligence, and even caught a fly that was flying in the press room and ate it. It freaked out Lex, and then Superman comes up to Lex Luthor, grabs the brain drain machine and pulls it off his head, and then grabs Lex by the back of his jacket and pretty much carries him out of the press room. Superman exits City Hall, giving Lex over to Inspector Henderson and the waiting police. Then he flies off. 2 days later, at an award ceremony in front of City Hall being held by the mayor, who has now recovered, along with his bodyguards who also have recovered, we're ready to give Superman an award for stopping Lex Luthor. In the crowd waiting was Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen. Lois armed with her pen and notepad, and Jimmy with his camera, ready to take photos of the event. As they were waiting, Jimmy says to Lois, "I'm sure glad that everybody made a recovery. It was a good thing that Professor Hamilton was able to formulate a drug to restore everyone's brain function." And then Lois asked Jimmy, "What about the brain drain machine?" And Jimmy says to Lois, "According to Clark, Professor Hamilton has it locked up in Star Labs." And Lois says, "Well, that's good. At least that thing will never see the light of day again." Then the mayor comes up to the podium, and everybody was less than enthusiastic to see the mayor. After addressing the less than stellar crowd, the mayor then says to everybody, "Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we just now have to wait for Superman to come so he can receive his big reward." Suddenly, Superman comes in for a landing and lands on the stage. He comes up to the podium and he says, "Good day, Mr. Mayor. I am glad to see you." And the mayor says to Superman, "I am glad to see you too, and I am very thankful, and many people who were affected by Lex Luthor's evil invention are thankful too." Then the mayor hands Superman the key to the city. And then the mayor says to Superman, "Superman, I've had a talk with the chief of police, and I've talked things over with the city council, and I talked with a few other legal entities in the city, and they all have agreed on this decision I'm about to make. Superman, I hereby deputize you to make arrests in the city." Then the crowd erupted in applause. The mayor hands Superman a special badge, and then Superman says, "Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Chief of Police. Thank you, City Council. Thank you to everybody else." Meanwhile, in the crowd, Lois asks Jimmy, "Jimmy, where is Clark at?" And then Jimmy says to Lois, "He's at some sort of appointment today. He took the day off." And then Lois says, "Figures." After receiving the key to the city and his special badge from the mayor, then Superman says aloud, "Up, up, and away!" And then he leaps in the air and flies off into the sky at high speed as the crowd cheers on. Like and subscribe. The end.